Imagine this. You're walking down the street, minding your own business, when you see a woman in a wheelchair struggling to get past a group of men blocking the sidewalk. They glance at her, smirking, and instead of moving, they make it harder. One of them even kicks a rock into her path, laughing as she stops short. To them, she's just an easy target, an inconvenience they can push around for fun. But what they don't know is that they just made the worst mistake of their lives. This isn't just any woman. Her name is Sarah. To the world, she looks like an ordinary mother, someone who has faced more than her fair share of challenges. Life put her in that wheelchair, but it never took away her strength. She's not weak, not helpless, far from it. Because before she was a mom, before she was the woman people underestimated, she was something else, something dangerous. Sarah was trained for years in combat, tactics, and survival. She wasn't just good, she was one of the best. But after a job went south, she left that life behind, choosing peace over violence. She thought she had buried that part of herself forever. But today, these men have unknowingly dug it back up. At first, she tries to ignore them. She's learned to pick her battles, to let things go. But when one of them leans in, grabbing the handles of her wheelchair like it's a toy, her patience runs out. She looks up at him, her eyes calm, unreadable. He has no idea that he's seconds away from realizing the truth. The moment is tense, the air thick with something unspoken. And just like that, everything is about to change. Because these bullies, they have no idea who they're messing with. And Sarah, she's about to remind them exactly why you should never judge someone by what you see on the surface. What happens next? You'll have to stick around to find out. The man gripping Sarah's wheelchair smirks, his buddies chuckling behind him like this is all just a game. "What's the matter, lady? Need some help?" His voice drips with fake kindness, but his grip tightens, and Sarah feels the weight of his arrogance pressing down on her. She glances around. The street isn't empty, but people are looking away, pretending not to see what's happening. It's always like this. Bystanders frozen in their own little worlds, hoping trouble won't notice them. But trouble has already arrived, and these men have no idea just how deep they stepped into it. Sarah takes a slow breath, steadying herself. She could end this right now, but she hesitates. Old habits tell her to strike, to teach them a lesson they won't forget, but she's not that person anymore. She left that life behind for a reason. But then one of the men nudges the stroller parked beside Sarah's chair. A soft coo comes from inside, and her heart tightens. That's when everything shifts. They don't just see her as weak. They see her as powerless. And worse, they think they can toy with her, with what matters most to her. The man at the wheelchair laughs. "Relax, we're just having a little fun." Sarah's fingers curl around the armrest. Fun. That word lingers in her mind, pulling her back to a time when she was the one people feared. The days when she didn't hesitate, when she made split-second decisions that meant life or death. She spent years trying to bury that part of herself, trying to be something else, someone else. But looking at these men, hearing their laughter, watching them inch closer, she realizes something. Some people mistake kindness for weakness. Some people don't recognize danger until it's staring them right in the face. Sarah meets the man's gaze, her expression unreadable. "You should step back now," she says quietly. The man just grins wider. Or what? A small, knowing smile flickers across Sarah's lips. He has no idea what's coming. The man doesn't move. If anything, he leans in closer, his smirk widening like this is all a joke. His friends shift around him, chuckling, waiting to see how far they can push things. Sarah doesn't flinch. She just watches, calculating, reading every little movement, every shift in weight, every sign of hesitation they don't even realize they're showing. The stroller beside her shifts slightly as her baby stirs, a tiny sound breaking through the low hum of the street. Sarah's fingers twitch. They're too close to her child, too close to a line they don't even know exists. The sun hung low over the water, casting a golden glow as waves gently lapped against the dock. It was the kind of peaceful evening that made all the hard work of fishing worthwhile. But for Lisa, that peace was about to be shattered. She had spent the day helping at her son's small fishing business, a job she loved not just for the fresh air, but because it kept her connected to him while he was away. Today, though, he wasn't just away. He was on his way home. And she had no idea how badly she would need him. It started with the distant roar of engines. At first, Lisa didn't think much of it. Bikers passed through town all the time. But as the rumbling grew louder, she glanced up and saw them pull into the lot near the dock. 5 men, all clad in leather jackets, their bikes shining under the setting sun. Something about them felt off, not just the way they carried themselves, but the way they immediately locked eyes on her. One of them, a tall guy with a thick beard, smirked as he stepped closer. "Nice little setup you got here," he said, eyeing the crates of fish by her side. His voice carried a cocky arrogance that made Lisa uneasy. She forced a polite smile and turned back to her work, hoping they'd just pass through. But they didn't. Instead, they lingered, circling her like wolves sizing up prey. Then came the mocking comments, the laughter. One of them even kicked over a bucket of freshly caught fish, sending it spilling across the wooden planks. Lisa's heart pounded, but she kept her cool. She had dealt with rude customers before, just never a group like this. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly have guessed, was that Lisa's son wasn't just a fisherman. He wasn't just some guy running a small business by the docks. He was a former Navy SEAL, and at that very moment, he was only minutes away. Lisa swallowed hard, trying to keep her hands steady as she gathered the spilled fish. The bikers weren't just passing through, they were testing her, pushing to see how much they could get away with. She wasn't weak, but she was smart enough to know that standing up to 5 men alone wasn't the safest choice. Still, she wasn't about to let them walk all over her. "Please," he said, keeping her voice calm. "I'm just trying to finish up for the day." The bearded man chuckled and squatted down beside her, picking up a fish and tossing it carelessly back onto the dock. "Relax, lady. We're just having a little fun," he said, his voice dripping with fake charm. The others snickered behind him, their amusement growing. Lisa glanced toward the parking lot, silently hoping to see her son's truck pull in. He had texted her earlier, saying he was on his way home after months away. She had been counting down the days, excited to finally have him back, but now that excitement had turned into something else, something more like desperation. One of the bikers, a lanky guy with tattoos covering both arms, took a step closer. "You know, a little kindness goes a long way," he said, grinning. "Maybe offer us a discount, huh?" Lisa clenched her jaw. This wasn't about fish or money. It was about power, about them making sure she knew they were in control. She knew their type, men who got a thrill from making others feel small, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because while Lisa was keeping her cool, her son Jake was less than a mile away. Jake had spent years in the Navy SEALs, training for situations far more dangerous than this. He had seen the worst of humanity, faced threats most people couldn't imagine. And after all that time, there was one thing he never tolerated: anyone messing with his family. As he drove closer, his instincts kicked in. Something wasn't right. And when he finally pulled into the lot and saw his mother surrounded, he knew one thing for sure. This was about to end. Jake's truck rolled to a stop, his sharp eyes locking onto the group of bikers surrounding his mother. His grip on the steering wheel tightened. He had seen a lot in his years of service, things that had hardened him, made him a man who never hesitated when it came to protecting what mattered. And right now, nothing mattered more than the woman standing alone against these men. Frank let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "Just reminding folks that respect is earned." The leader of the younger bikers, clearly struggling to keep his composure, crossed his arms. "All right, enough with the games. Who are you people?" His voice was steady, but the slight tremor in his hands gave him away. The man at Frank's table finally turned to him, his expression unreadable. Then he glanced around the diner, his gaze settling on each of the younger bikers one by one. You ever hear of the Iron Brotherhood? He asked, his voice low but carrying weight. The moment the name left his lips, one of the younger bikers stiffened. His eyes darted toward the man, then back to Frank, realization dawning across his face. No way, he whispered under his breath. Frank lifted his coffee cup, but didn't drink. Way, he said simply. The leader frowned, his confusion deepening. What's the Iron Brotherhood? The biker who had recognized the name took a slow step back, shaking his head. They're not just any riders, he muttered. They're legends, a group of veterans, elite, the kind of people you don't mess with. The leader swallowed hard, his confidence unraveling. He looked around at the group now surrounding the diner, their movements deliberate, controlled. These weren't just some old-timers on bikes. These were men who had seen war, who had survived things that most couldn't imagine. Outside, the sound of more boots echoed as another figure stepped forward, and when the diner doors swung open again, the man who entered made everyone, including Frank, sit up just a little straighter. The diner doors swung open, and the room seemed to shrink under the weight of the figure stepping inside. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with a quiet authority that made even the toughest men take notice. His weathered face held deep lines, not just from age, but from experience, the kind of life that left marks beyond the skin. His gaze moved past the younger bikers without a flicker of concern before landing on Frank. For a moment, the two men just stared at each other. Then, the newcomer gave a slow nod. Been a long time, Captain, he said, his voice steady, respectful. The younger bikers stiffened. Captain. Their leader turned to Frank, disbelief flashing across his face. The old man, who had seemed like just another frail veteran moments ago, was something else entirely. Frank set his coffee down and folded his hands on the table. Didn't think I'd ever have to pull that card, he admitted. The younger leader shifted uncomfortably, his bravado all but gone. All right, we get it, he muttered. You've got connections. The man who had just entered let out a low chuckle. Kid, you have no idea who you've been messing with. He turned to Frank. What do you want to do with them? Frank took a long breath, then stood, his movements slow but deliberate. His eyes met the younger biker leaders, and for the first time, there was no hostility, just something close to pity. You came in here thinking you could push people around. Thinking age makes a man weak, he said. But respect, real respect, is something you earn, not something you take. The leader's shoulders tensed. His crew was watching him, waiting for his next move, but he had nothing left to say. Frank finally sighed. Let them go, he said. The other veterans exchanged knowing glances but didn't argue. The younger bikers hesitated, unsure if it was a trick, but when Frank gave them a small nod toward the door, they didn't wait. One by one, they backed away and hurried outside, their pride bruised but their lesson learned. The tension in the diner lifted, but just as the last of the bikers disappeared, the man who had called Frank Captain stepped closer, lowering his voice. You sure about that? Frank looked out the window, watching the young riders speed away. They'll remember this night, he said. And if they don't, he tapped his phone once. They know who to call. The diner slowly returned to life, the clatter of dishes and quiet conversations filling the space again. But one thing had changed. Every person in that room looked at Frank differently now, not as an old man sitting alone with his coffee, but as someone who had just reminded the world exactly who he was. Frank sat back down, his fingers wrapping around his coffee cup as if nothing had happened. The others slowly followed, but the energy in the room had shifted. The waitress, who had been watching everything unfold, finally let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. She walked over, her hands gripping the coffee pot a little tighter than usual. Jake didn't look away as Marcus parked a few yards away and stepped out. He moved with the same quiet control as Jake, his gaze scanning the scene with the sharp awareness of a man who had seen trouble before. He didn't need to ask what was going on. He could read it all in the way the bikers stood, the way Lisa kept herself steady, the way Jake's muscles were just a little too still, like a storm holding its breath before breaking loose. Marcus took his time walking over, his boots crunching against the gravel. When he stopped beside Jake, he gave a small nod. "Didn't think I'd be meeting you like this," he said, his voice calm but firm. Jake kept his eyes on the bearded man. "Neither did I." For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of water lapping against the docks. Then, just when it seemed like the bikers might decide to back down, the bearded man let out a low chuckle. "All right," he said, holding up his hands. "We get it. You guys are tough. No need to get all worked up." He took a step back, nodding to his crew. "Come on, boys. Let's not waste any more time here." Relief flickered in Lisa's chest. Maybe it was over. Maybe they had finally realized they'd messed with the wrong people. But just as the bikers turned toward their bikes, something unexpected happened. A car pulled up near the entrance of the lot, its headlights cutting through the dimming light. The door swung open, and out stepped a man Lisa instantly recognized: Ron Avery, the owner of a rival fishing business down the road. Her stomach sank. Ron had never liked their family's success. He had always been the type to play dirty when competition got too tough. And now, the way he leaned against his car with a knowing smirk told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't a random run-in. This was planned. Lisa's breath caught in her throat as Ron Avery leaned against his car, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold like he had been waiting for this moment. The bikers, who had been on the verge of leaving, paused. A slow grin spread across the bearded man's face as he turned back toward Jake. Jake felt it too, that shift in the air, the way everything suddenly felt planned, deliberate. This wasn't just some random group of bikers looking for trouble. This was something bigger. Ron pushed himself off the car, walking toward them with lazy confidence. "Didn't expect to see you back in town, Jake," he said, his voice slick with fake politeness. "You always had a way of showing up at the worst possible time." Jake's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. He didn't need to. The history between their families spoke for itself. Lisa's small fishing business had outpaced Ron's for years, and he had never taken it well. The fact that he had gone this far, bringing in bikers to intimidate his mother, told Jake everything he needed to know. Ron glanced at the bearded man, then back at Jake. "See, I was just telling my friends here how business around these docks works. Some people don't know when to step aside. They keep pushing, keep taking what isn't theirs." He turned his gaze to Lisa. Figured they needed a little reminder. Jake's hands curled into fists at his sides, but he kept his expression unreadable. He had dealt with men like Ron before, people who hid behind others, who pulled strings, and let others do their dirty work. He wasn't going to take the bait. Marcus stepped closer, his presence a silent warning. "You made your point," he said, voice steady. "Time to move on." But Ron just chuckled, shaking his head. "See, that's the thing," he said. "I don't think we're done here." The bearded man smirked and reached into his jacket, and in that split second, Jake's instincts kicked in. Before anyone could blink, Jake moved. His hand shot out, grabbing the biker's wrist before he could pull anything out. With a swift twist, he forced the man's arm behind his back, sending him stumbling forward. The other bikers reacted, but Marcus was already there, stepping in with the same quick precision. Lisa stepped back as the scene unfolded in an instant, Jake and Marcus handling the situation with practiced ease, their movements sharp and controlled. Within seconds, the bikers were backing off, realizing they had severely miscalculated. Ron's smirk faded. He had expected intimidation to be enough. He hadn't counted on Jake being here. Jake let go of the bearded man, who stumbled back, rage flickering in his eyes, but hesitation keeping him from doing anything more. Jake turned to Ron. "This is your one chance," he said, his voice cold and steady. "You ever come near my mother again, we won't be having another conversation."